Hey, this is Nadine with DIY Sweets. Today we're going to make some cake pops. But before you can make the cake pops, you have to start by getting the ingredients that you need for the cake pops. We're going to be making some ganache, and we're going to be making some chocolate cake for our cake pops. We're going to start by showing you how to make the ganache. Ganache is made up of just two ingredients: whipped cream and dark chocolate. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to put this whipped cream into the microwave, and I need it to come just to a boil. So I'm going to turn the microwave on for like 3 minutes, and then after that 3 minutes, I will start watching it until it boils, because as soon as it boils, we want to take it out. The whipped cream is in the microwave. I'm just going to start it and let it go for 3 minutes. So I'll come back and show you what we do after it comes to a boil. Our cream has come to a boil. In fact, it didn't even take 3 minutes. As you can see, it is boiling. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this cream and we're going to pour it over our dark chocolate. And then it just sits on the dark chocolate for 1 minute. This gives the dark chocolate time to melt so that when we stir it, we can have it all congeal together. I will be back after this is set up for 1 minute. This is now sat for 1 minute. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this and I'm going to stir it. You see, as I stir it, the milk is starting to turn, or the whipped cream is starting to turn brown. So all I need to do is I need to stir it till it all becomes a nice shiny brown, and it looks more like the chocolate and not so much like the milk. And you're not trying to whip it and beat it up at this point. You're just trying to mix it all in. As you notice, it's starting to get a little bit more chocolatey. One thing I've noticed about ganache is you'll sit there and you'll think, this just is not really coming together. And then all of a sudden, right at the end, it will just become nice, rich, shiny, and notice all of a sudden it is just coming right to that shine. Like I said, it all of a sudden does right at the end. Now that this is all mixed in, and you'll notice it is very runny. If I were going to pour this over a cake, I might let it sit for about 5-10 minutes, just enough to cool a little bit, but I wouldn't want it to sit too long. But because I'm going to use this in my cake pops, and I want it, when I use it, to be the consistency of buttercream, I'm actually going to cover this and put it in the fridge and let it sit overnight. When I pull it out of the fridge, it might become very solid, and I'll have to bring it to room temperature. But the idea is I want to make it so I can beat this, whip it up, which will make it airy, and have it be the consistency of buttercream. So this will sit for a day, and the next step we have is we want to make our chocolate cake. We're ready to start the cake now. I'm going to cook the cake in this pan. So the first thing I need to do, because this cake doesn't need to be pretty, it just needs to be baked so we can break it apart, is I'm going to take this pan and I'm going to spray it down. And this type of spray I have is a spray that has flour already in it. So that's all I need to do. The next thing we need to do is we need to start making the cake. When you make a cake, you need to sift the flour first. So I have my cake flour here in this sieve. So I just moved the flour around in here, and you notice I have found a bowl that fits just right. So the flour goes in the bowl instead of all over the counter. I find this works much faster than a sifter. just going to get that last little bit out. When you measure flour, you want to make sure that it's a level cup. So what I do is I kind of move it back to the back and then I scrape it off. This recipe calls for 2 1/4 cups. So I'm just going to measure out my 2 1/4 cups. And the recipe wants us to add all of the dry ingredients. So there's my 2 1/4 cups of the flour, and in here I have 1 teaspoon of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of salt. 1 teaspoon of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of salt. Now before we mix this up, we need to get our eggs ready. So we have, we also need to add to the dry our sugar. And the sugar is 2 1/4 cups. Now what I need to do is I need to crack my eggs. And I'm just going to put them in this bowl because they're supposed to go in a small bowl. And to that, the 4 eggs, I want to add 1/4 of our chocolate mixture. And then I will whisk the eggs and the chocolate mixture together. So right here I have about 2 cups of this chocolate mixture. So I'm just going to put about 1/4 in there. And then I need to get a whisk out so that I can whisk that lightly. So I'm just going to whisk my eggs and my chocolate together. And to that, I need to add some vanilla. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon vanilla to this. And then I'm just going to finish whisking this until it's all mixed up. And then that's ready to be mixed in to our cake batter when we get to that part. The next thing it wants us to do is to just lightly mix the dry ingredients. We just want to make sure it's all mixed together. And then as soon as we see that it's mixed together, we're going to add one and a half cups butter. And our chocolate, the rest of our chocolate. Now, as soon as that is mixed in like that, we're going to turn this on medium, and this is going to blend for 1.5 minutes. This is now blended for 1.5 minutes. So I'm going to just scrape the bowl down. I'm going to lower it so I can scrape it better. And then that egg and chocolate mixture that you saw me mix up earlier, I'm going to add that to my cake batter. And I'm going to do it in 3 additions. In each addition, I will go about 20 seconds in between adding. Let's get the first addition in there. Just want to try to guess what about 1/3 is. And I start this on low, just like I did the other one, until that liquid is in, because otherwise it's going to just really splash up. As soon as I see it's mixed in there well enough, I bring it to medium. And I let that go for about 20 seconds. I then turn that off so that I can add the next 1/3 in. Let that go on just low. As soon as I see that is mixed in, I will increase the speed. And then that goes for another 20 seconds. Then I turn that back off, and this time I want to make sure I get all the rest of the stuff that is in my bowl. So I'm actually going to use my scraper to get it in there. And I'm also going to just quickly, before I turn it back on, I want to scrape down the sides to make sure that this is all scraped down. Okay. Then I'm going to turn it on low again, just to get that mixed in. Then I'm going to turn it up and beat it for like 20 seconds. We now have our chocolate cake batter. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to scrape this down. Take that beater off. Make sure I get all that excess batter off. One thing I like to do right here, before I get any further, is I usually, from the batter, I will just take a little bit on my finger and taste it. By doing that, I can tell if I'm missing any ingredients, and it tastes really good. So that's ready. So now I'm going to take my cake batter and put it in the pan. And here's the pan that we sprayed down. So all we're going to do is take this cake batter and dump it into the pan. And I do want to try to get all of it in here so that all of it will cook. Now usually if you're doing a single cake mix worth of cake, it takes about 30, 35, 40 minutes to cook. So I'm going to set my timer for 30 minutes. At the end of the 30 minutes, I'll look on it. Usually in my oven, it takes closer to 40 minutes. But I still like to start checking at 30 because sometimes it'll surprise me and it'll actually be done in 30. And I have the oven turned on to 350 degrees. That's what I preheated it to. You're going to have to figure out your oven if it heats high or heats low. So I'm going to stick this in the oven, let it cook for half an hour, and then check it. And then if it's ready, I'll pull it out. If not, I'll cook it longer. So we'll be back as soon as this is cooked. The timer just beeped on the oven. And as I look in my window to look at the cake, it's looking like it might not quite be done, but it might be done. I'm going to turn the timer off, and I'm going to check my cake. To check my cake, I just use a toothpick. You can get a cake pick and check that. I do not really want to move the cake as I check it. I just want to stick my hand in and check it and see if the toothpick comes out clean. So as you see, that is not a clean toothpick. That has a lot of wet chocolate batter on it. By just poking a hole there and being very careful and not moving the cake is still doing well. I'm going to give this about another, well, I'll come back and check it in 5 minutes. So I want to be checking about every 5 minutes now. So we'll check back when it's ready. It's been another 5 minutes. The timer has just gone off. I'm going to open it and check it and see if it's done. Okay. So you'll notice this time as I poked it in, there's a couple of crumbs, but the cake itself is done. So we're ready to take the cake out. Here is our cake. We're going to put it on a cooling rack, and we're going to let it completely cool on the cooling rack. We don't need to worry about getting the cake out of the cake pan because we're going to be breaking it all up anyways. The next thing that we want to do to get ready to make our cake pops is we want to make the snowflakes that we're going to put on these cake pops. Our cake pops are made of chocolate cake with chocolate ganache. And so I want the snowflakes to also be made of chocolate. So I'm going to make the snowflakes out of chocolate modeling clay. I have these plunger cutouts that are snowflakes. And as I look at them, I can tell this one is just way too big. This one might be a good size, but even it looks a little bit big. And this one looks just about the right size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this plunger. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get my modeling chocolate. And you'll notice it's kind of brittle, or it feels like it's kind of brittle. But as I work with it, and I've had this modeling chocolate for a while, this is not fresh. But as I work with this, it's going to come together and become soft and more pliable again. So that's the first thing I want to do, is just knead this together until it becomes nice and soft and pliable. Now the one thing you have to know about modeling chocolate is that if you work it too much, it becomes too soft and you can't work with it. And then you have to stick it in the fridge for a while. So we don't want to knead it to the point that it becomes too soft because your hands are warm. And the other thing I want to do is I want to use, this is not flour I'm putting on the surface. This is cornstarch. And I want to use that on the surface so that the modeling chocolate does not stick. So I'm just kneading this. And because this modeling chocolate, it's not a fresh batch, but it's been around for a while, I may find there's some lumps, like right here is a really big lump that I just want to pull out of it because it's probably not going to work the way I want it to. But this is about all the more I want to knead it. Now I'm just going to take it, lay it down here. Looks like I need to put some cornstarch on this side too. And I'm just going to roll this out. And you may have to keep applying cornstarch so that it doesn't stick. Lift it up, apply cornstarch underneath. And I want to roll this out about as thin as I can get it. Because you don't need it really thick. You don't need big, bulky snowflakes. So once I have this rolled out, and let me just lift that up so you can kind of see that's all the thicker it's going to be. I'm just going to take my plunger, which I also want to dab on here so that I know it's coated. I'm just going to take my plunger, put it in there, and then I'm going to just snap it out like that. So I'm going to continue doing this until I have what I'm sure will be enough. As I cut these out, I'm just going to stick them onto this parchment paper. So I'm just going to keep doing it until I have enough for my cake pops. You can get these snowflake plungers. You can get at pretty much any cake decorating store. You can order them online. They're a very basic fondant or gum paste cutter that you can get pretty much anywhere. So they're not hard to come by. So I'll keep doing this and I will come back and show you what we do next after all this is done and after the ganache is set up and we're ready to mix that, and once the cake's cooled and we're ready to work on that. Our cake is cooled and our ganache has been in the fridge overnight. So what we're going to do now is we're going to crumble up the cake and mix up the ganache and then mix them together so that we have our cake pop mixture. All we need to do is take our cake, don't need to be neat about it, and we're going to put it in this food processor. And you'll have to do this in more than one batch of it because the food processor is not big enough to hold this whole cake. Now all I need to do is turn this on. And we're just going to let this go till it's all ground up really fine. Just stop it for a minute and try to get some of these crumbs down in there that were staying on top. You can crumble it without using a food processor, but this does make it just a little bit finer. Okay, once you have it ground up, you're just going to take this and dump it into a bowl and see how fine that is. That's what we want, is really fine. And you can feel the moisture too. So I'm just going to continue doing this until I have the whole cake finely ground up. And then I will come back and show you what we do next. We have all the cake now ground up and in this bowl. What we want to do now is we want to take our ganache and we just want to whip it up so that it's the consistency of buttercream. It is important that you let this sit in the fridge overnight so that it becomes thick enough that it will be the consistency of buttercream. I know I've tried to rush it before and you can work with it, but it just doesn't set up as nice as this. See how nice and creamy this is? Just like buttercream. Now what we want to do is we want to add the ganache to the cake. But we may not need to add all of this ganache. So we're just going to take, usually when you make it, it's one cake package mixed up in cake to a half a cup of the ganache. Now this isn't a packaged cake. This is a scratch cake, and it actually makes a little bit more than a packaged cake. So it's probably going to need more than a half a cup. It may even need all of this. You don't want to add it all at once. So you just add it in, and I'm going to start with the spoon trying to stir it in. I'm going to have to get my fingers in there at some point. But I kind of want to get the ganache to not be one big glob, but to be mixed in there better. And one of the reasons I'm going to have to get my fingers in there is because that's the only way I'm going to be able to see if I have enough ganache in there that this will hold a shape. So now I'm going to go like this, and I'm just going to kind of knead the dough. See this big chunk of ganache. We want to mix that in with the dough. I shouldn't say dough because this is cooked cake. So with the cake crumbs. And it's going to make what looks like kind of a dough, except we're not going to be cooking this again. We're just going to be forming it into balls. So you see how this is making a really nice kind of dough-like consistency. We want to make sure all of it is like this. So I'm just going to keep mixing it up. And if I find I have some dry spots, then I'll just add more ganache. But this is feeling like it's not going to need any more ganache. One of the reasons I like to use the food processor instead of breaking the breadcrumbs up is it actually brings the moisture in the cake out and makes it stick together better. You can break it up with your hands and you'll get the crumbs, but you might have to add more ganache. But doing it in the food processor, look at how good that dough is. It is ready. I'm going to have some nice, moist cake pops that are going to be so deliciously rich and chocolatey. When we get to this point, what we're going to do is we're just going to roll out our cake pops. And to measure it, I like to use scoops. And you can decide, I have 2 different scoops here, and I'm not yet sure what size I want for my cake pops. So I'm going to look at the little one first, and I'm just going to scoop up. This way, by scooping it up like this, you're kind of guaranteeing that all the cake pops are the same. So I'm going to scoop it up, and then I'm going to roll it in my hand. And I want to roll it so that I get it round, and I want to make sure there's no cracks in it. Because if you have cracks in your cake pop, it means it's too dry. The crack can make your cake pop weak, and it'll crumble instead of staying together when you start putting the stick and things in. So this one looks pretty good size. And I'm going to make one of the other size. And I'm going to decide, after I've made both of them, which size I want. Because I can put back in the bowl the one that I decide not to go with. So here's the bigger one, and here's the littler one. Looking at these two, I'm thinking I want to go with this smaller one because my snowflakes were not all that big, but they'll look nicely sticking to one on each side with this size. So I just got to make sure that's perfectly round. Put that on there, and I can even somewhat round it while it's on there. So I'm not going to need this one. Get it out of the way, and I'm just going to mush that back in there and start making my cake pops with this. And while you still may not get them all exactly the same size, using a scoop like that will ensure that they're pretty close to the same size. And you can put these pretty close on this pan. You just want to make sure they're not touching. One thing to make sure is you want to really mush this really good when you first get it in your hand so that there are none of those cracks, and then you round it up. Don't know if I said that with the first couple, exactly what I was doing. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm mushing the cake pops dough. So say I have the dough, I stick it in my hand, and the first thing I'm doing is I'm mushing it. And so see, it's not really round at this point, but I'm making sure I'm getting all those cracks out of it. And then I start rolling it to make it a circle or to make it a ball. And with that, see, you get this nice smooth ball. And you know, your cake pop may not be perfectly round. That's okay. It's going to look, once the chocolate's on, it's going to look pretty much round. I know they make a cake ball roller that you can buy, but that costs like $100 or more. So unless you're going to go into the profession of making cake pops, just do it this way. They may not be perfect, but they're going to taste so good that, and they're going to look round enough and people aren't going to care. And people will be praising just how good your cake pops are. And you don't need to tell them how easy it was to make it. I'm going to continue doing this until I have my whole pan full of cake pops and my dough all gone. And then I'll come back and show you what we'll do next. Now I'm going to take these and put them in the fridge. And they need to sit there for about a half an hour. You can leave them for about an hour, but you don't want to leave them a really long time because then they start to dry out. The reason we're putting them in the fridge is we want the butter in the cake to become hard, and we also want to re-harden up the ganache. Because with me rolling it in my hand, I softened everything up, so I want it to firm up. It's not really going to become hard, but it is going to firm it up. And so we're going to stick these in for a half an hour to an hour, and then we'll pull them out and we'll be ready to go on from there. Our cake pops have now cooled, sat in the fridge for a little over half an hour. I've also got this pot of chocolate that I've melted down. So the next thing we need to do is we need to put these sticks into all the cake pops. To do that, all we do is dip the stick into the chocolate and then take a cake pop and push the stick down into the cake pop, just like that. So we're going to do that for all of the cake pops. As soon as I have all the sticks in all the cake pops, I am going to stick this back in the fridge at least 10 minutes, possibly longer. We basically want to make sure that all of the chocolate sets up, because that's what's going to make it so that these cake pops don't fall off the stick when we dip them into the chocolate. So I will come back and show you how what we do for dipping them after I have all of these with the sticks in them and the chocolate has set up. Our cake pops have now chilled. We're ready to start dipping. So I have my chocolate. I have my bowl so that I can sprinkle the sugar over it. And I have my snowflakes that we did earlier. I put my cake pops right here. So what I do is I just take a cake pop and I'm going to just dip it right in that chocolate. And then I want to get as much excess chocolate off of this as possible. And to do that, you can tap the stick, or you can tap the stick against the container that the chocolate's in. It also helps to kind of twirl it. Now, because these cake pops are cold, it actually starts setting pretty fast here. Now, when you do cake pops, you can do it several ways. You can have them so that they're up straight like this, or you can stick them down like this. I prefer mine, at least this one, to be up like this. So I need to make sure there's absolutely no dripping coming before I remove this from the bowl. It takes a little bit longer to dip them because I have to have them a little bit more set before I move to the next step. Now, once I get to this step, I'm going to take my sanding sugar and I'm just going to sprinkle it over my cake pop. Now this kind of helps make it look like it's got that icing look. And then I'm going to take a snowflake and I'm going to stick it on there. And because this is modeling chocolate and not regular chocolate, I can actually just bend it down in there. And I want to put a snowflake on each side. So I have the snowflake on that side. Now I'm just going to put one on this side. Now this snowflake, some of the stuff broke, but that's okay because I just stick it on there, get them attached. And because I'm pushing it down into the chocolate, they're going to just look like a complete whole snowflake. Okay, so I have my cake pop with the snowflake. Now, what I like to do to let them totally dry is I have some styrofoam, and this one, it kind of looks, it doesn't look all that great because I've used it a lot of time for cake pops. So I just stick my cake pop down in the styrofoam in holes I've already made. Now this may drip a little bit down the stick. That's okay. You'll be able to wipe it off when you're done. So now I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to do this with the rest of the cake pops. So just to remind you, what we do is we dip it in the chocolate. Then we get all the excess off. And I keep it over the bowl until there is no more dripping. Notice as I tap it, I'll get some more that's dripping. But I want to keep it over the bowl until there's no more dripping. I want to be able to hold it up and see that no more is going to be dripping. See, when I held it up that time, I could see it was forming a big thing that was getting ready to drip. So I just put it back over the chocolate. I can see there's another one right there, so I'm going to tap to see if I can get that to come off. And I want to come more off at the bottom. Okay. Now that I have that, I'm going to get my sanding sugar again and sprinkle that over my cake pop. Give it that icy look. Now I'm going to take my snowflake and I'm just going to place it right on there. Once it's on there, I want to push those snowflakes down, snowflake edges down into the cake pop. Then I'm going to turn it around. Give me another snowflake. Try to get it, oops, try to get directly opposite. And of course you want to try to do this. Looks like I've got it just a little bit too dry there. So I just wet that down. And then just stick this on. Because I do have that chocolate there. If for some reason it gets dry while you're doing it, you just put a little bit more of the chocolate on there. And then you can get the snowflake on there. I have found as I've been doing these, and I've been trying different ways, because I always do, that sometimes I found it's actually easier, so you may want to try this, to put the two snowflakes on first while that chocolate is still very, very wet and hasn't had any time to set up. Because then as you're bending those down, they just sink right into the chocolate and mold. And then I sprinkle the sugar on. I find doing it this way, you sometimes even get a little bit of glitter on the snowflakes. And that way the snowflakes really do go right into that chocolate and blend. So that's another way to try it. Another thing I wanted to show you, if you look at my chocolate here, my bowl is no longer totally full. It's about halfway empty. And so if I were just to take my bowl and dip it in like this, it wouldn't cover the whole thing. When it starts getting that empty, I usually will dip half and then dip half, and then you have the whole thing dipped. You still go through all the other same steps of getting all that excess chocolate off. and putting those snowflakes on and sprinkling the chocolate. When I'm doing this, I always rotate a little bit because that kind of seems to help get the chocolate to stick, to harden. And I do that while I'm tapping so that any that's excess will come off. So when I have it to that point, this is where I grab my snowflake and I stick it on there, push it down. Then I turn it around, grab another snowflake, put it on, push it down into the chocolate. And then I sprinkle, and I'll usually look at my cake pop from all directions to make sure I get all of it sprinkled. And then I'm ready to put it into the styrofoam. Now the other thing I wanted to show you is when this gets down even lower and I'm not able to really dip half and half, you can actually spoon it on like this. That way you don't have to melt more chocolate and have all this excess. And then just do the same thing, because you notice, because this is a liquid form, spooning it on and then holding it this angle and tapping it, it becomes that smooth again. So again, I will come back and show you different ways to display and to package your cake pops for giving out to people. I have my first styrofoam form of cake pops done or dipped. At this point, I want to take these cake pops and put them in the fridge so that this chocolate can totally set up. Now, you don't want to keep these in the fridge forever. They just need to be there 5 to 10 minutes or so until the chocolate becomes hard again. What I usually do is I leave this batch in the fridge until I get my next styrofoam filled. And then I'll take this out and put the next styrofoam thing in the fridge. When I have all of the cake pops done, then I just leave the last one in for about 10 minutes and then I pull it out. One important note to notice, none of these are touching. You need to make sure that when you put these in the styrofoam, that they are not touching each other. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in the fridge, continue making the other ones. When it's all done and they've all chilled, I will then show you how you can present them. We have the cake pops all done now. Let's show you some ways that you can present and display your cake pops. One way is to use a container like this. These you can get at Michael's or Hobby Lobby. They're made by Wilton and they're lollipop holders. All you do if you want to use one of these is you stick the lollipop stick into there. And you want to make sure that the tier above is in between the other ones so that the lollipops sticks don't stick into the other ones. And you just load up your cake pops like this. And a small lollipop stand like this holds 18. Okay, so this is one way that you could display your lollipops. I don't like this way as much as this way. Now this you can't buy in a regular store, but if you go online and type in Google cake pop holders, I believe that's what I typed when I found it, it'll come up. And the thing I like about this is all of your lollipops are at the same level on each thing because it's got a top and a bottom. So as you stick your lollipops in there, there's a place for that stick to rest at the bottom. and they're all at the same level. So see, as you can see, there's a place there for the sticks to rest there, and they're not at different levels like at this one. Now, if you like that different level, see this one's higher, and they're all on the same level, except that because of how the chocolate was in that, they're not all level there. Where here, each of them on the same level will be at the same height. The other thing nice about using a cake pop holder like this is when you take it, when you move it to set it down, it's easier to carry this. This one is a little bit more awkward. It's hard to find a spot to pick it up, and it's just not as well balanced. So this one, you'd want to actually not put the lollipops in until it's in the place you want it. Where this one, you could set it up ahead of time. Okay, so as I said, here's another way to do it, and you have it on different levels. And I believe if you were to order something like this, you can get it 2-tier, 3-tier, 4-tier. Another thing you can do is you can get a piece of styrofoam and cover it with fabric or paper, and then poke them into the styrofoam like we did while these were cooling. One last way that you can do it is you can get individual bags like this and take your cake pop and just stick your cake pop in the bag. If you were going to make a whole bunch of these, you would want to do that, especially if you're not trying to do a display, but you just want them to last, because this will help keep it fresh. The next thing you can do is you can take a ribbon and tie it around it and make a pretty bow. You can trim that ribbon once you've made the bow, do the little corner cuts. Or you could, if you didn't want to use a ribbon, you could do a twisty tie. Or I've even before just gotten tape and taped it shut like that. So all of those are really good ways to present your cake pops. The nice thing about this is you can lay them down and you can stack them in a bigger container, and you can fit a lot of them in the container. If you are transporting these to another place, you do want to make sure that they're still in the styrofoam block for the transport. And then put them in your display thing when you get there. Now, if you choose to use a styrofoam block that's covered, you could put it in that. If you choose to use the bag, then you would just have it in the container and you would lay them out on the table. But if you're using one of these two methods for display and you have to travel with it, make sure you put the cake pops back into the styrofoam block so that you can travel with it. Also, you're going to want to probably take a couple of more than what you have for your display thing, because traveling in the car, there is no guarantee that some of these will not break. And so you do want to make sure that you have a few extra in case some fall off the stick while traveling the car. Now, if you wanted to display in a display like this, but also have them in a bag, and you would want a smaller bag, then you probably wouldn't need to take extra, because traveling in the bag, they would travel fairly safely and you'd be okay. But bobbing around on the styrofoam container in the car, they can break. Usually they don't. It depends on how many bumps you have and if you have to slam on the brakes. But you always want to have a couple of extra just in case. Now, one thing I wanted to show you, you'll notice on here we have a cake pop that fell down. And here we have a cake pop that fell totally off. When you make cake pops, always make more than you need. Because of these 45 cake pops that I made, 2 of them fell off the stick. Now, this can happen for several reasons. Number 1, I might have pushed the stick too far in, and so as the weight of this was going on it, it would pull through and it would go all the way through because the stick was too far in. Because you really only want the stick about halfway in. Now, so you notice this one, I could actually go like that, and there I have it at the top again. Because this one stayed on the stick. But you wouldn't want to give this to someone unless you were going to plug that hole with more chocolate. This one, on the other hand, because it fell off and actually fell on the counter, you could not serve it to anyone. You could eat it yourself. It's still going to taste good, but it wouldn't work at all with the presentation. So you want to make extra, because in baking, you're always going to have stuff that's not going to quite turn out right. The fun thing about doing this kind of cake pop with the cutouts and the sprinkle is you can do it for just about any holiday, any season. Because if you go online and type in plunger cutouts, you're going to come up with hearts, stars, just about anything. And even if you don't get the plunger ones, you can get the little tiny ones of a lot of other shapes. And as far as the sanding sugar, any cake decorating store or online, you can get it. You can even make your own sanding sugar by putting it in a bag and adding some food coloring and shaking it up and making it different colors. Now, because mine was snowflakes, I wanted to use white. But if you were doing hearts, maybe you'd want to do pink or red or purple. If you were doing shamrocks for St. Patrick's Day, you would probably want to get some green sanding sugar. One thing I did notice about the sanding sugar as I do this, I don't know if there's any scientific reason for why it happens. It's an observation I made. As I'm putting that sanding sugar on it, it seems to stop the chocolate from dripping down much more. You might get one other blob, but you really don't get much. That sanding sugar seems to set the chocolate in its place so it does not keep dripping. Be creative. Let me know some of the things that you did to create your cake pops if you don't do the snowflake ones. So here is our cake pops. This is Nadine from DIY Sweets. Enjoy and happy baking.